even had socio-cultural components to fill out the full realm of sustainability. Aspects. And what it did is it created submodels for each of these different systems, water, building, and both at the site level and at the building level, based on different building typologies that we would model. And then it went into a central platform that used a nonlinear algorithmic thought engine. It's hard to say, but it would basically compare 10,000 or so different combinations of strategies that all in the same platform. So in other words, you have different building energy strategies for different building types, and you also have transportation strategies and transit strategies. You also have water reduction strategies that have energy implications. So those are all linked. So and you go through all that brain damage so you can answer a question like this. Show me the combination of sustainability measures that give me the highest reduction of carbon and greenhouse gas, but don't exceed development cost increases by more than 3%. Because there's actually an economic dimension to the modeling. So for each one of those strategies, you actually have a cost. And you have a cost to the public sector, a cost to the master developer, and a cost to the individual builder. Because if you don't do that, it's just like all blue sky, right? I mean, you can model all day long, but nobody can afford to do what you're suggesting. So this actually allows you to model for the most cost-effective, strategies.
Sorry, is that one of your programming paradigm, or how does that work?
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Is that based on linear programming, or is it more?
No, it's basically a very fancy spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet, very complicated spreadsheet with this algorithmic engine that's just sort of plugged in as a plug-in that allows it to run different scenarios.
Wow. I have a follow-up question, Stephen. So how does it incorporate life cycle costs? So if you put in some efficiency measure that may cost more than 3%, but you're saving energy over the long term, how does the model account for that?
That's a good question. It does actually. Some of it's and one of the things we can do, if you like, in a future session, I can actually. I've got like a whole bunch of PowerPoints from where we've done this. I can show you some of the outputs and the screen captures, but it actually does life cycle modeling on all of the components, and so you can take out you can see. Take out a 20-year or 25-year time frame. You can see what the break-even point is, and what the life cycle break-even point is in terms of years, and that can be one of the factors in helping. What you do is like if you have a water submodel, you would do like 6 different strategies that would range from a 5% to a 50% reduction in potable water demand. And those would start with things like just higher efficiency fixtures. For the low hanging fruit. And then it starts to go into more and more aggressive efficiency fixtures, and it jumps into secondary and tertiary gray water, and then black water, and then district gray water, and building level gray water. So it adds on more and more exotic strategies, and of course the cost goes up. And what you find, it's really interesting that you find yourself looking for kind of a sweet spot. Where you have a significant amount of reduction, but the cost and return metrics are within grasp. Not ridiculous in terms of what it's costing to do it. But I'd be happy to do a presentation. Our biggest project, we've worked on this for about a decade, and we did about a half a dozen projects in the U.S., large-scale new communities. And then the recession hit, and we ended up going overseas. And we ended up doing huge projects in the Middle East and a lot in China. because in terms of countries that have an interest in this type of thing, the U.S. is kind of at the low bottom of the list, unfortunately. Whereas European, of course, European countries kind of are very sophisticated. They have their own similar models, but the Middle East and Asia were very interested in this. So the biggest project we did was in Singapore, where Singapore has a huge project called Marina Bay, and it's actually doubling the size of downtown Singapore. And we were brought in to basically use this modeling to develop the sustainability program for Marina Bay. It's a 50-year, 150 million square foot development project. And URA at Singapore is still currently using. They adopted this as their, as their model for going forward, managing the project.
Well, I think there would definitely be interest. This is fascinating to hear about, Steve. I think we'd love to have a follow-up maybe and see that model a little bit more. So thank you.
The only downside, and I'll tell you right now, is that it's expensive. And so you have to want it all to go to that level of sophistication.
Right. Well, Alan's got it. Blank check, right, Alan?
He'll Utah, it's promised.
So, can I ask a question?
Sure.
And welcome to Scott and to Bryson as well for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, Scott. To be here. Hey, Steve, does that include the societal costs of carbon and criteria pollutant emissions over time?
No, it doesn't have upstream. It doesn't have embedded carbon in it. It's not that sophisticated. At some point, you just have to kind of, you can only do so much in one model. But no, it doesn't go to that level.
Well, it'll be good to see that, and I'm sure there will be additional questions as we get into that. Clearly, though, we appreciate having your experience. We will rely on that, I'm sure, as we move forward with this. So thank you for that, Steve.
I'm going to go ahead and very quickly log out and log back in because I need to share my screen in a few minutes, and I can't figure out how to do that. So
we know we won't have offended you then. You're not just, that's good to know, Steve. Thank you. Well, just really quick, again, welcome to Scott and Bryson. I don't think we had you join us last time, so it's great to have you as part of this Environment and Air Quality Working Group for The Point. Just a quick reminder for today of what our goal is for this meeting. I think we had a lot of great conversation in our last meeting, a lot of really valuable ideas that were shared, and appreciate Alan and Muriel and all the follow-up and the information that you shared with us so we could dig through a lot of that. Today, a reminder, our goal is to identify which key concepts we want to include in our RFQ. So as we review the agenda, and Alan's going to do some recap, and we'll have more from Steve and review the poll and the information that we have there. Remember, that's our goal for today, is again trying to whittle this down. We had a lot of really, really good ideas. And so we're going to try to whittle that down to see if we can get some consensus on some of our top priorities for what we should have included in that RFQ as we move forward. So keep that in the back of your mind as we're reviewing last meeting's minutes, and as Steve is presenting and as Alan shares with us some of the additional details about the RFQ. That's our goal for today, is to try to whittle this down. And we'll have opportunity later in the agenda to have some back and forth and some dialogue on that. So really appreciate your input so far. And right now, Alan, we'll turn it to you just to give us a little bit of a recap from our July meeting, and then to Steve after that.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate it. And thanks again to all of you for participating. We really value that input, and thought that the discussion at our first meeting was terrific, and expect more of that today. I think it was important that Scott mentioned early on goals that we have for this meeting, and there are actually a couple of them, but the primary one is to see if we can identify those elements, the key concepts that we want to include in the request for qualifications. And Steve will talk about that a little bit later. We'll also ask you to identify which of those topics you're interested in. Maybe have some homework over the next few weeks as we look in more detail at some of those concepts. What are what are the elements, characteristics of those concepts that are important? How do we break them down into constituent parts that we can actively address and make some progress on? I think, importantly, I want to mention at the beginning that all of the ideas that are generated are in the mix. We're capturing them, we're considering them. So as we go through a process of identifying a few top priorities, understand that that's just so that we can get to this next step on the RFQ. But that doesn't mean that the other ideas will not be carried forward and considered. So just in terms of providing a little bit of context and a reminder of where we've been, had that good meeting at the end of July. We asked you a number of things, including kind of your vision for the site, and we heard a lot about the importance of making good infrastructure decisions up front. If they're part of the initial development, it's a lot cheaper and easier to get them incorporated. Talked about the living building challenge as well, the importance of looking at energy efficiencies and carbon reduction, including potentially a goal of net zero development on the site. A recognition that automobile emissions are declining as part of our overall emissions profile, and the area sources and buildings are becoming a bigger contributor to air pollution. So we have a chance to set an example of more efficient buildings on this site. But that doesn't ignore the need to look at reducing automobile emissions. So a lot of discussion about creating a walkable, mixed-use, transit-oriented community, a place where we would minimize the need for cars and maybe even eliminate the need for cars, looking at autonomous electric circulators, robust active transportation system. Talked about water systems quite a bit, and the need to explore how we can minimize runoff and pollution, low impact development, opportunities for reuse at the site or using some of the wastewater treatment facilities in the area. I think there was a lot of support around looking at sustainability measures that could be demonstrated at the site. Everything from microgrids to again, some of these water reuse standards, looking at the geothermal resource on site and taking advantage of that. And using this as a place where we can demonstrate sustainable development approaches for other developers. Talked about some partnerships with University of Utah Energy Assessment Center, Rocky Mountain Power, and others. So that's sort of an overview of the discussion. We took your input and tried to bring ideas together into various categories. We also combined public input from the Development Commission process that occurred a couple of years ago and created those draft key concepts that we sent out as part of the survey that you took. So don't want you to feel at all constrained by the language we used. It was just an attempt to kind of take what we heard and put it in categories that we could work with. So that's kind of where we've been. So I think the next step, Scott, is to kind of turn to where we're going, and Steve has a little input, and then I'll talk a little bit about it.
Excellent. Steve, are you working all right on your computer? Can you see your screen? You're muted right now. We can't hear you, Steve.
There we go. Okay. Let me pick the right thing here. And then let me know if you are seeing it.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, do you see the full screen now? It'd be a very complicated looking schedule.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go through this in detail. I just wanted to show you we've gotten our arms, trying to get our arms around this thing and do some program management and some scheduling. I can just say so far we're on schedule. So there we go. Of course, since I did the schedule, I made sure that would be the case. I will just hit a couple of highlights here for you. One is we're going to be focusing the rest of this calendar year on the putting together the team. We've got a process that's pretty straightforward here of selecting a consultant. We've got a candidate list that we're putting together and finalizing right now. We've got about 20 to 25 firms that we're looking at. We're probably going to narrow that down to about 15 and then go out to an RFQ process and take a month or so going through that process, after which we will narrow it down to a, let's say, 5 or 6 or so, and then go through an RFP process that would include budgets and full team makeup, whereas the RFQ would be primarily for the lead consultant only and no budgeting. And in that RFP process, we're going to include some components for them to respond to. So it's not just a standard proposal they come back with, but there's actually a series of key vision components and some of them drawn from what you guys are doing right now and the other working groups. So the working groups, as Alan noted, will be culling from your highest priority key components and including those in the RFP for the consultants to come back with thoughts, preliminary thoughts on. We don't really want it to be a design competition, and we want it to be a little bit more of a thought competition, because there's a whole process for doing the design, which is this process. Right now, we have it broken down into these components. We haven't added a freestanding sustainability component yet. We wanted to get a little bit more. I wanted to hear a little bit more about what you all are thinking. And then if we want to do so, that will probably be a freestanding element in the work program. Right now we have a misspelled site evaluation, opportunities and constraints, initial step, land use programming, which RCLCO is currently working on and we will confirm. And then contextual modeling is this notion of doing some GIS-based spatial modeling at the, I don't know if it's at the sub-regional scale, but at least the area larger than the project, surrounding jurisdictions and land areas, so that as we're developing plans, we are plugging into a context of infrastructure, of land use, transportation, where things are kind of copacetic and complementary, and it doesn't feel like it's a spaceship falling from to Earth kind of relationship. Then we'll be going through some conceptual alternatives at a high level, and then the framework plan refinement, and then a guidelines and documentation piece at the end. There's two key components that are consistent as we go through these. First is there's key vision elements, which are again the key components that you all are coming up with, that we will be sort of checking into as we go through this process at each level. And then also we have a financial optimization analysis at each level, so we make sure that we're at least staying reasonably within the realm of market fit and financial performance. So anyway, those are the primary steps, and then like I said, I think I'm sensing that sustainability is important enough, and if we wanted to go through a process similar, or maybe not quite as on steroids that I discussed, but we call the process I was describing was the model was SIM, Sustainable Systems Integration Model. And we actually developed a SIM-Lite version. So anyway, we can talk about all that later, but then Arup and other firms have similar models that we could look at as well. But if we want to do that, that would probably be a freestanding piece in this process.
Excellent. Thank you. That's great to see that, the time frame, what we're looking at there. Any questions from the group on this, just initially? Or any responses to that?
Sure, I have a couple of questions. This is Sarah. I'm wondering where things like, is it land use? So that site has direct use geothermal capabilities. So where will that be included as part of potential energy that can be used on site, and how is that included? And then also, are we thinking about how we're laying out the buildings? Is that something so that they have maximum solar gain, or really use the benefits of the site? Where does that fall in?
Well, both of those things would be in a sustainability strategies component, but we'll be adding to the schedule. The actual level of detail of those guidelines are things that we're going to need to work on. Those are things that you all. The goal in these working groups is right now you're kind of at this level of just identifying sort of key concepts. But as Alan was mentioning earlier, we're hoping that over the next couple of months that your ideas you break down into some working groups that are focusing on specific elements. Like there might be a working group on energy, there might be a working group on water and transportation. We need to determine that. But as those working groups then would go to that level that you're talking about. What are the components? What are the general guidelines and strategies that you want to have at least initially incorporated into the planning process?
And this is just a structural question because I have never been part of planning anything to this scale. But I know that when we plan buildings to be super efficient and super sustainable and low emission, that the sustainability piece is core to the planning processes. And maybe I'm not understanding, but it feels like it's sort of layered on the outside versus part of the whole vision of the site. I think it was you, Alan, last week that said that, after the site is built, we want it to still be a showcase. And well, I don't know if it's 10 or 20 years, I forget what it was, Scott or Alan, who could probably say that it's kind of ahead of its time in terms of sustainability.
I do have a comment on that, or an opinion. One of the things that, when I do my sustainability lectures, I have this one, it's one of my favorite slides. And actually there's two slides, and one of them demonstrates that the earlier you integrate sustainability strategy into a project, the higher benefit you get at the lowest cost. And one of the biggest mistakes the developers make is they design their project, they design their buildings, and then they say, okay, let's make it sustainable now. And to do that, it's very expensive, and it ends up being fairly shallow. Whereas if you start at the beginning, as you're noting, and make it core, the return on investment is much higher. The second slide is a diagram that talks about the design and planning process. And historically, master planning and a lot of design, building design is very linear. And you start with concept, and then each step is, and you bring people into it, consultants into it, and experts as you need it as you go through this linear process. But there's an article I can send around on the concept of integrated design. And integrated design means that it's not linear. It's concurrent, and you basically, instead of being like a line, it's more like a circle. And around that circle, you have the expertise. You have water, you have energy, you have transportation, you have these different ecology and sociocultural, and though that team is inputting and synergizing with each other all the way through. And by doing that, you end up having a much more efficient and fully integrated design and planning process. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because it reminds me of that as we go forward in terms of our putting our team together and our process, we should base it on the integrated design approach rather than the linear approach.
Yeah, that's a good input. And I'm wondering, Scott, yeah, we'll get to you in just one second, if we can get the time frame sent out to us as well so we can see that. I'm assuming anything that's shared today, we can see that just to kind of help us track this process as well.
As long as only on the caveat that you understand that as soon as I send it, I'm probably going to.
Yeah, it's going to change? Yeah, of course. Thank you. Yeah, Scott, you had a question.
Yeah, just as a follow-up to the concept of concurrent integrated community planning, I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the Smart Growth America 10 principles and whether or not that's a model that could be used or not. We're just sort of becoming more familiar with that approach. There isn't really any Smart Growth America affiliates in Utah, whereas most other states have them. I'm not that intimately familiar with it either. I am familiar with it in general. But that's, let's take notes and we'll do some research on that and see what we can glean. There are a number of systems and policies out there, and it's probably not a bad idea to do a little bit of an inventory of all the various, systems and approaches that have sort of bubbled to the top over the last decade in sort of creating fully integrated metrics for sustainable cities.
Thanks, Scott. So we'll not hold you to that schedule exactly, Steve. Thanks for your willingness to pass that along. That'll be helpful for us just as we go through this process. Alan, if we can turn it to you now just to review the requirements. Again, remembering that that's one of our goals is trying to narrow down some of the what's going to be included in that. So that would be helpful if you could share with us that and the deliverables specifically that we have as a work group to help with this process.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And so Steve has talked about the planning process and schedule generally. I want to talk a little bit more about the role of this and other working groups in moving that process forward. I'm going to start by sharing with you just a little video that we have that maybe puts some of the timing in context and where we're going in the next few months, and then I'll talk through it after that. You see that?
Alan, your artistic abilities are amazing. Hand drawing all of that. Congratulations.
You know, it took a while, but I knew all that doodling during DEQ meetings.
I knew it.
Great. Well, again, that's sort of an outline of where we've been and where we're going, but let me emphasize the key points as we go forward. First is that we plan to issue requests for qualification in mid-September, so not very far off. And the idea is that we're going to try to identify planning teams, lead planners that have the background, experience, qualification, skills to come in and accomplish the things that we want to accomplish as a state. So, goal number one today is to essentially go through the polling that we did with you on the key concepts you identified last month. And we'll have a discussion as a group. You can change those concepts, you can combine them, you can do whatever you want. But the point is that we're hoping to come out today with 2 or maybe 3 high-level key concepts that can be included in the RFQ. Now, let me be clear, an RFQ is not a place to put a lot of detail. And so we're not going to have, 3 concepts from each of our 5 working groups. It'll probably be 5 or 6 overall, and we'll look for those that have shared interest among the groups, etc. So we're going to have to be making some judgment calls internally on that. But again, that doesn't mean that other ideas will not be carried forward. We're going to continue to consider everything that you suggested at the first meeting and additional ideas that come in. So anyway, that's job number one. Then we want to start at the end of the meeting today, heading into what we want to accomplish in September and in October. So if we start with the end in mind, we want to have a short report ready by the end of the calendar year that we can hand over to the lead consulting team that outlines a number of concepts, goals, ideas that we'd like them to consider as they move forward with the master planning process starting the beginning of the next calendar year.
Alan, if I may just ask a question quickly. On that report, do you anticipate there will be a subsection for each of our working groups?
Yes.
That's right.
So it's not going to be a big thick report in detail, but what we want is to be able to identify the process we've gone through and then have the ideas, concepts from each of the working groups identified. Some obviously are going to be higher priorities than others. Some concepts and ideas are going to be higher priorities than others. And so at the end of this meeting, we'll take the top 2 or 3 concepts that you identify and create a subgroup for each of those and ask that over the next few weeks, just kind of meet and put some meat on the bones. What do we mean? If we talk about robust, multimodal transportation system, what does that mean? I want you to kind of explore that in a little detail and identify the components or characteristics of that kind of a system. Maybe some of the strategic alliances that we would need to develop to advance those concepts, and key strategic next steps that would be important to advance that. So we would come back at the September meeting, have those subgroups just kind of present generally their thoughts on that they've developed over the month. Have some discussion in that meeting. Refine it a little bit over the next month into October, and have essentially bullet points that you'd like to have included in a report. Then at the staff level, we'll spend November and December kind of putting that draft together. We're not going to meet the last week of November or the last week of December because none of you would be there and I wouldn't be there. So we're not going to ask you to come in on Thanksgiving, but you may just send out kind of a draft of your section and see if you've got any comments on it. But so that's kind of the thought going forward. Any questions or ideas on process, that things you'd like to change?
Sounds good. Are we required to use Utah consultants?
No, we are not. And so, Steve mentioned earlier that he's kind of put together a list of 20 or 25 to this point. It includes some of the classic top planning firms in the country who have worked all over the world. He's also reached out to a number of networks of developers to see if they are aware of up-and-coming firms that are doing interesting things, cutting-edge work that we might want to throw in the mix. And so it's casting a fairly broad net, but targeting some that have demonstrated abilities.
Just quickly, welcome. A few people have joined: John Mackey, Mariah Jackson, and my illustrious co-chair, Carrie Kelly. Thank you. I need the help to wrangle this unruly and raucous group here. Just getting back to Alan, part of our assignment, what we're trying to accomplish today, in narrowing down many of the ideas that we've already put together, narrowing that down to maybe 2 or 3 high-level concepts or principles. And then after that, we're going to add the meat to those bones, as it were, what that looks like specifically. Could it be that some of the ideas that we've already shared are the details? Let's say, for example, we have a sustainability as a priority, and geothermal is one of those sub-points under that, or something along those lines. Maybe some of the ideas we've already shared are those bullet points under those 2 or 3 high-level principles. Could that maybe work in that direction?
Certainly, and it really is up to you. Just as an example, yesterday we met with the group looking at education, research, and innovation. And they had several big concepts that were fairly close in terms of scoring and also closely related substantively. So they combined them into a single concept, and they're moving forward with recommending just that one concept. But again, it has some subparts to it. Again, if you decided nothing that was in that poll really captures what we want, you're at liberty to wordsmith a little bit and combine or come up with something new. So, got some free reign today, but again, the goal is that before we wrap up, we would have no more than 3 key concepts that would potentially fit into an RFQ. And then again, we will take those concepts that you identify and create subgroups that can work on further defining them.
Excellent. Any questions on the RFQ or our deliverables from the group? Excellent. Okay. Well, Alan, I can't wait to see the results of the survey. Let's jump in.
Let's do it. Let's see where all of you are. Muriel, do you have that? Can you pull that up? Yeah, everybody, during poll season for the elections, everybody waits with bated breath to see what each new poll brings. We'll, thanks. So we have a couple of pages here. One is this bar graph that shows what the voting was, and then we can go down further and it'll show the details on the statement that you were voting on and how many people ranked it as their first, second, third, etc. priority. And there's a composite score there at the end. So maybe we can just kind of go through number 1, was this idea of site-wide sustainability, best practices, and we had a number of little pieces that fit in there, from microgrid, geothermal, the water reuse. We talked about requiring that those doing the construction have clean engines as part of the equipment, those kinds of things. So that broader site sustainability was number one. Let's see. Number two, the water conservation and water quality standards. Looking at strategies to use less water and to minimize the water pollution that comes off the site. So part of that is the local scape or xeriscaping programs, implementing low impact development so that we're capturing more of the stormwater on site and not putting it in pipes and down the Jordan River. That was number two. Let's see. And closely there, serve the site surrounding region with high quality transit. This was a big deal. Have active transportation, seek to minimize the need for individual cars, and be creative in the transportation realm. And then beyond that, maybe Muriel, we can go back up to the bar graph. You can kind of see that there were a number of others that certainly had support. And so park and trail system in there. Then the third one, development promotes equity and affordability. That was a piece that came up. We had some partnerships that we looked at. One was looking at what we should not consider, but anyway, you can see where all of that played out. So I guess at this point, you've got the choice from saying, look, we've made our decision, we're comfortable with where the poll came out, here are our top couple of ideas, we want to include those in the RFQ, or this is time for discussion among yourselves and make a case for raising one of these ideas on the poll or dropping something further down, combining them. Whatever you think is appropriate to reflect your collective wisdom on the priorities for this group.
So, Alan, a quick question. Is the label on the top of it maybe incorrect? Because it seems like the highest ranked ones actually have the highest number.
Well, yeah, those that did the poll ranked them 1 to 9 or 10, and then the staff went through and can score them. So, yes, I see the confusion you've got.
Yeah, I was a little confused by the first two, but I think I got it now. But maybe some different labeling eventually.
Right. No, I understand that, and I had some of the same reaction, but it has been adjusted based on the priorities that were expressed.
Alan, thanks for walking us through that. And I guess if it's okay to jump into the discussion phase.
Please.
Okay. I really liked the number one sustainability, kind of an overall sustainability ethic. The one thing that gave me pause, and as both Scott Merritt and Alan are very familiar with, is the reuse element. Reuse is a really good thing. It is interesting that in this basin, it can have negative downstream effects to the Great Salt Lake. So that was the only thing that gave me pause is, I think we have an opportunity here to recognize the NPX of water use, and water strategies on the Great Salt Lake and how our role is on that. So that was the one thing that gave me pause about that I just wanted to bring up.
We can't do any of the reuse without the okay or the permission of the state engineer, can you?
That is the case. One of the challenges associated with that is the state engineer doesn't necessarily always take into consideration impacts on the Great Salt Lake. So they're looking specifically at beneficial use, not necessarily on downstream environmental impacts. There is some language in their statutes that says the state engineer can look at public trust impacts, but historically they've not done so. Which may change in the future, but I just wanted to raise that.
An observation about how some of these, well, the things that were voted on, there, and I've been part of some of these different visioning exercises. Recently there was the Gardner Institute's Utah Roadmap, and we had a similar situation there where some of these line items are very specific, like promoting EV infrastructure, and some are very broad, like a concept like sustainability. So we're doing some things at like a 35,000 foot level and some things right up close, and so and that's okay. I think we just need to recognize that something like the pursue site-wide sustainability is a real catch-all category, where some of these others are pretty granular.
I appreciate that observation, Glade, and I guess that's a question that I would have for this group as well. As we look at our assignment and what we're going to put into the RFQ and what we might get back from whoever's going to submit proposals for this is, if we want to keep those 2 to 3 points at that 30,000 foot level, high level, so that there's more opportunity for unique ideas potentially in there, and then we can kind of add some of the flesh, the meat to the bones, as it were, as Alan said earlier, with some of the specifics that sustainability could look like this, but leaving maybe more of an open opportunity for those submitting proposals to share ideas. Or do we want to be more specific? I think that's a question for us to answer, if we want to keep it at that high level for those 2 to 3 recommendations, or if we want to get narrowed down in.
Well, I always like to have my cake and eat it too. I'm wondering if we could have some high-level principles with some examples of, without saying, like, you must do this, but these are some opportunities that the site might offer.
So if I can, go ahead, sorry.
But I was just going to finish that if we have an overarching of sustainability, reduced emissions, et cetera, I would love to work in Stephen's idea of integrated design as part of that. But go ahead, Stephen, with what you were going to add.
Well, I was just going to say that when we've done this in the past, we have very concrete ideas of kind of what we want them to look at and do. But I think I like what we've done is actually backed off of that in both the RFQ and RFP to, because if we lay out too much detail, they'll just kind of go, okay, that's what we'll do.
Exactly what we'll get, right.
Whereas if we just say, these are general goals, tell us how you would approach it, you just learn a lot more about them. And then when we're actually in the process, we make sure that we're actually checking all the boxes. Because we have the whole planning process to actually make sure that the things we want to get covered get covered.
Well, don't all the other ideas that follow kind of somewhat fall into that generally? That's the sustainability. Like, saving water or having energy efficient buildings or those type of things. I think wouldn't they be part of that?
Yeah, they would be. I think we need to, when we get into the RFQ and RFP, we'll just need to craft it to where, it's not, the answers aren't obvious, we have to craft it to where the questions are a little bit more challenging, like zero energies, a very, that's a pretty tall mountain. And just sort of talking about that and how they would approach it, what their experience is, I think will tell us a lot.
Yeah, and we may talk about whether that's a goal that we want.
Yep. I'm going to step away.
And I mean, go ahead, Scott.
I'm sorry I wasn't at the last meeting, but what I don't see here, and I just wondered if there was a discussion about critical habitat preservation. Was that discussed at all?
I don't like to talk much about it.
And we've, by the way, we've done some surveys of the site and haven't identified critical habitat at the site. It is very close to the Jordan River, so we recognize the need to create some links there and be aware of the implications of that.
And the other one you and I talked about at one point was fugitive dust mitigation. Was that discussed at all?
No, I don't think that came up in the first meeting much.
So it seems like there's, I don't know, I'm trying to put this in 3 buckets, and then we could flesh out that with how we describe them, but one overall is like the sustainability and reduced emissions. Another one might have to do with transit trails, active transportation parks, including restorative measures to habitats like around the Jordan River. You know, how can you take a site that could be degraded and really bring it back? And then something about people. I don't know, people, equity, diversity, housing options. That's one. That's my first. But I would love to hear other people's ideas, because I feel like we should have 3 buckets and then be able to fit everything we want in those buckets.
Does that part of that mean affordability?
Part of that means affordability. And I don't think I said water, so we have to fit water in there.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the 3 buckets are, but I like the idea. At least it gives us a little bit of partitioning or something. Obviously, there's going to be some overlap categories sometimes, you know, active transportation and trails, but I think, or open space or something like that. But so I'm with you, Sarah. I don't know what the best 3 buckets are, but maybe there's a way to craft that.
But
It sounds like we've got a good start with what Sarah had suggested.
Yeah, I agree with that sustainability piece being one, that we can have air, water, I think could go into that bucket as well. And then the transportation trails piece seems like another one. And then an equity affordability piece. I guess the question I've got, Alan, on this last one, that equity and affordability, are there other groups, other working groups that are addressing that as well? Just curious if you've heard that from others.
Yeah, it's a general matter. I can't say it's gotten a lot of attention and a lot of discussion, but yes, it's come up. And at least a couple of the other groups.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I like the idea of trying to group things together in these 3 buckets. I would say I think of sustainability as an overall concept that encompasses everything we described in those 3 buckets, rather than one of those buckets. I fundamentally.
So you've been put into one bucket, Carrie. Way to go.
I mean, sustainability is the big bucket, right? I think one thing I would caution us is the approach where we, make the big sustainability bucket, says a chief sustainability officer that does this all the time, right? And then just shove everything under it without some thought as to where the real priorities are, or where the real target areas are, or articulating some clear goals. I just, when I see these processes, sometimes sustainability is so broad and can incorporate so many things that you end up trying to do all of it all the time and not articulating what are the really core things that you want to make sure move forward. And so I'm hearing some of them here, right? I'd also throw an air quality focus into this lens because of its particular traction in our community in Utah, right? And framing some of these. So I want to reframe that first bucket that Sarah talked about, right? Because I think sustainability is all those buckets.
I agree.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, I agree with that. I was having some of the same issue with sustainability just pertaining to some of those concepts. And then this other thing I want to bring up, and it's sensitive, and I'm fully on board with the equity kind of environmental justice aspect of it, but I almost see that as an overlay that kind of spans some of these issues, and maybe I'm getting too hung up on the environment or the original name of this group, and now I'm drawing a blank.
Environment and air quality, you're right.
But I think, to me, that's equity and affordability and EJ issues kind of somehow plugs into each of these potential areas in various ways, and so I don't know if it's best as a standalone one of the three buckets, or if it's something that we can somehow bring up that spans across the buckets.
Can I just throw in something? In our experience of doing a lot of this modeling, one of the things, the bucket that we found is, reduced greenhouse gas carbon emissions. If there's a particular target or emphasis on reducing the carbon footprint, it trickles down into like everything else. And in a suburban environment, typically the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases are mobile emissions. And so there's a direct link. If a primary goal would be to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by, pick a number, 35% relative to a baseline condition for conventional development, you're going to end up getting a big chunk of that through transportation and strategies, because your biggest contribution is going to be. So just one thought would be one bucket, rather than just saying sustainability, because that is so overarching, is greenhouse gas emissions reduction would catch a lot of different, have a lot of ripple down effects.
So I'm wondering, go ahead.
This is John, and by the way, sorry for arriving late. I had the same concern with the single bucket idea. How about, a resources bucket that would capture, water, air, land, and then maybe a community bucket that would cover things like environmental justice, parks and trails, and of course there's overlap in between those. My third bucket is still sustainability, which is really kind of the overarching umbrella, but that's another way of dividing it, where I think that we could I don't know, place a number of these individuals in the column, recognizing the overlap.
The word I haven't heard yet that is actually, there's been a lot of transition from talking about sustainability to also adding resilience. And resilience, of course, is, sort of acknowledges the fact that we're not going to necessarily solve climate change within the next couple generations. So how do we design our communities to be most resilient relative to the impacts of climate change? That could be another basket if you thought that important.
Can I make a comment on that? As someone right now at the University of Utah leading the climate resilience work and assessment, I'm finding, and someone who's been in Utah for 17 years, right, doing this work, I'm finding not widespread understanding of what resilience means and what that incorporates. And so I would just caution us in that area that that's a concept that even in the university setting, I'm finding I need to take moments to explain. And I would also caution that maybe we don't tie it only to climate if we are talking about resilience. I would absolutely love to see that framing in the work that we're doing. I'm not sure if that's the right communication framing for our community at that time. Does that make sense? Right?
So
Alan, can I say a little bit more about the equity and affordability piece? And that seems, like Mike said, the original name of this group, that seems like it's sort of broadening the purview of this group. I'm certainly completely committed to it, but I'm just wondering if you want us to focus more, or if that seems to you like something that is within our purview.
It's a good question, Scott. We certainly don't want to constrain any discussion or ideas here. But I think the land use and infrastructure group is looking at that, and the economic development group is looking at it as a way to bring people in and make sure that we're preserving affordability. So I don't know that needs to be a top priority here. I think it's a concept that many here are considering. But again, if you've got some input on that, we're taking notes, and we'll work it into the broader mix as we bring all the working group ideas together.
I would second what Glade said on that to me, that question of equity and justice applies to all of these issues we're talking about as water decisions. And so to me, that's part of that top lens that should be part of our filter as we're doing this work. I mean, it's fundamental to sustainability. So I'm not sure we need to articulate it to me, that's part of the overarching lens of sustainability, and we would bring that to each of the buckets.
I hesitate to jump in, so feel free to ignore, and I'm not trying to direct anything, but just one concept that comes to mind is you could say one goal is to reduce pollution or emissions, and the second is to reduce resource use. So in that first one, we can talk about strategies to reduce runoff, pollution into the waterways, automobile emissions, emissions from buildings. And the second one, when we're talking about reducing resource use, you bring in water conservation, energy efficiency, those kinds of things. Then one reason that came to mind is because our statute specifically directs us to improve air quality and minimize resource use. So you can, in a way, align it with some of those statutory directives.
So, Alan, you'd think we could work together. I had just written down almost the same thing. I was wondering if under this sustainability bucket, I hear and fully agree with the concern that it could be too broad. But I think that we can define what we mean by that. To Alan's point, we can have sustainability as a bucket, and underneath that it's right. I think that could fall under that community livability. Yeah, great point.
So I'm liking where we're going. Like, I'm wondering where we incorporate, going back to early in the conversation about, integrated design, and how do we make sure that the folks that are responding to the RFQ, or do we just look for the fact that, let's say, that they'll do integrated design for the site, so that they'll do recommendations?
And Sarah, would this go back to your original suggestion to sort of go with these categories and then give some examples of things we're looking for?
And I'm not sure if Stephen thought that wasn't a good idea because it could hamstring people, they think that's just what we want, but.
Well, I think the three categories are worth clearly mentioning, letting them respond to all three. If we can have room to fit those in, but yeah. But not giving a lot of detail.
Yeah, I think it's their job to fill in the dots, right? To connect the dots. We give them categories with ideas underneath and ask them to, tell them we expect them to connect the dots.
And I guess if we're talking about reducing emissions, go ahead. Sorry, Bryson.
They may show us things that we haven't even thought of.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe
that's always a very, that's always a very thing, an important thing to ask in an RFQ. Do you have better ideas? What other ideas do you have? Right.
That's well phrased.
And if we could talk about the things that we want to reduce emissions from, transportation, built environment, whatever, I don't know. And then they can give us their strategies on how they plan to do that. So how do we let them know some of the things that the site has? Like it has direct use, hot water, geothermal availability. Is that just worked in, or is that just part of the description of the site that they'll have the attributes of the site?
Yes, maybe at the end of the RFQ, we'll give them, and keep in mind, the RFQ is just a first screening level of, we don't have to make, everything doesn't have to be in there. This is where we go from like 15 firms down to 5 or 6. When we get down to the RFP, I think that's when we're asking them to invest more in response. I think that's where we'll probably give them a little bit more detail about the site and what we're doing.
Hey, Alan, in the early part of this, you talked about us articulating what we don't want to see happen. Is that something that we put into these buckets, or do we list those separately, or how is that going to be included in what we articulate?
Well, that was an idea that came out of this group at the last meeting, so we included it on the list. It didn't get a lot of support, probably just because we want to focus on positives we're accomplishing, but I think it's something worth considering. I don't know that we want to right now start putting together a detailed list of what we don't want to see inside. As we develop guidelines, Stephen talked about putting together a document that summarizes the broad goals and standards for the site. And in those standards, we can create details that necessarily eliminate some things like, as an example, kinds of equipment that can be used in construction. So I think there are other mechanisms for taking care of this. One thing this group might want to consider is, I know there's temptation to try to put every idea into the buckets and include it. As I said before, if something isn't included in the RFQ, it doesn't mean that it's not part of our ongoing consideration.
So in the RFQ, there's pretty lofty visions for this site. Is any of that information included? Some of the information that you introduced to us in the last, in our first meeting that got us all excited to be here and say, be part of this, is that sort of some background for the RFQ? In the RFQ?
Yeah, for sure. We want to get them excited too.
So right now, just looking at where we're at, it seems like there's generally consensus around these 3 buckets, I think. And to Steve's point earlier, where we can start to narrow some of our work groups around kind of fleshing those ideas out a little bit more between now and when that RFQ goes out. Are there any additional questions about those 3 buckets? And we've got that reduced emissions and impact on the environment, preserving resources, and then this community livability buckets that we can then take those. And I think that was our goal for today, is to narrow it down to at least 3 categories. And then we can take those, divide into maybe some smaller work groups and start to flesh those out a little bit. Does that seem like we've got consensus? Is there any concerns with those 3 groups right now, or does it not capture any of those initial ideas we had talked about last month?
I think it sounds good.
Yeah. I think this is fantastic. Thrilled with how this is kind of formed into these 3 buckets. I think they're going to be really good. Alan, anything else that you've got? You feel like we're on track with what you're expecting out of this group?
I think that's great. I think you've done a good job of kind of identifying priorities and things, information that we can get as part of the RFQ. So if, for those of you who are willing, our proposal would be that we take these 3 categories and create a subgroup for each, composed of any of you who are have the energy, time, and willingness to do so. And that over the course of the next month, you get together and put some detail to the broader concept. So if we say we're going to preserve resources, what does that mean? What resources are we trying to preserve? what concepts we have for preserving those resources. That won't be part of the RFQ, but it'll be part of that next step we have of trying to put together a little more detail that we can give to the successful planning firm to incorporate into their framework master planning process. So if Muriel has just put in the chat box a little matrix that has, let me take a look at it, that probably help me. That has your names and then each of those subgroup categories that we talked about. And I'd ask that maybe you go in and rank those, your number 1 priority, your number 2 priority, and your number 3 preference. It's probably a better way to do it. Which one would you most want to work on? Which one would be second that you want to work on? And then we'll get together after, we'll try to match up the groups as best we can and send an email out indicating who will be on each of those groups, a little more detail about what we'd like you to accomplish, and maybe identify one of you to at least take the lead on setting up the first conversation.
I see many of you are filling that out. You can't put one as your priority on all of them.
Sure you can. You can do all.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
And sorry, is 1 highest again?
Yes, 1 would be your preference to which group you would serve on, 2 would be your second preference, and 3 would be your last. So, and again, if you don't want to participate, that's fine too. We don't want to ask too much of you, but we want to at least give you the opportunity to be part of this conversation.
Excellent, thank you. That's very helpful. And so we'll wait to hear them back from you as we get our assignments and where we can continue to work on these. Are we okay now, do you think, to move on to the next item on the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, I've got to jump off. I've got another commitment, so at 11:30 I'm going to jump off, but I know we'll be able to continue to move forward. So we'll turn it to Muriel to talk about our public rollout, and then enjoy the rest of the conversation after I leave.
Okay, perfect. So just wanted to apprise you guys of where we're at with our communications and let you know of our public rollout we anticipate doing here in the next couple of weeks. So unfortunately, my Google Meets, I don't know if it's my laptop or what, but it's not presenting audio. So I just put in the chat feature a link to the points video. It's posted on our YouTube channel, so please take a look at that video. I feel like it really kind of captures where we're at right now, and we showcase Alan as well as some of our board members. So take a look at that. Would love your feedback and input. And then let me just go ahead and share my screen. Our website is live, thepointutah.org. I want to show on here how you guys are represented as part of our working group. And please take a look at this and let us know if you have edits to your headshot and bio. So here in the navigation panel, you'll see a few pages on our website, kind of just basic pages you would come to expect for pretty much any website. Under the Public Meetings tab, we have a section for working groups. You guys are listed here under the Environment tab. And we've got our co-chairs and members. I think our group has grown since we initially populated this page. So if you do not see yourself represented here, please send us your information and we'll get you added. So if you hover over your headshot, we'll just Scott here, you'll see a brief, just 1 paragraph bio for each one of you. So again, please take a look, thepointutah.org, and this page for our working group specifically, and let us know if you have any edits to your headshot and bio. I just also wanted to call out that we are, in the vein of transparency, posting all of our information, whether it be the Point board meeting or all of our working group meetings, on our website. So agendas, meeting materials, the recording of the meeting, and our notes from the meeting are all posted on our website. Here's a great resource for the public. And as Alan, I think, mentioned towards the beginning of the meeting, all of these meetings are also being live streamed on our YouTube channel for anyone who has a ton of time and wants to watch us in action. I also just wanted to point out here on our contact page some resources that we're making available to the public, because we do want their point of view. Little play on words there. Our team has had a lot of fun coming up with phrases that play on the word "the point." So, but yeah, we have all resources available to the public in terms of an address, email address, a phone number that comes directly to my cell, so they get a human answering the phone when they call. And social channels, kind of the usual suspects here on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and like I said, YouTube. People can send us questions, comments via our contact form, as well as sign up for an e-newsletter that we're probably going to call the Point of View. So that's just a little bit about our website. And you should have all received a flyer announcing the press conference that is currently scheduled for Monday, September 14th at 9 a.m. at the current correctional facility site in Draper. So as our working group members, we would love to have you attend. We are in the age of COVID providing virtual participation options via a live stream on our YouTube channel. So if you're not available or don't feel comfortable attending in person, we do have that option as well. But I will say we will be outside, appropriately socially distanced, and provide masks for anyone who needs it. So we would love to have you save the date for the press conference is attached to the calendar appointment we sent out from the Point account. And again, if you haven't received that, please just feel free to get in touch with me, and we will make sure that you get that. Additional details about exactly where on the site we will have the conference will be forthcoming. Alan and I are going to be donning our booths and going out there Friday afternoon to take a look with the wardman and correctional facility staff to see where would be the best location for staging the press conference. You'll hear a lot about us in the news, because after that, we'll be making the rounds with the news outlets, and we'll have actually met prior to that with editorial boards of the major print outlets to kind of make sure that we're conveying our message, as well as providing the public an update on where we're at as we transition from the visioning stage to now the planning stage. As you guys have seen, we've hired this world-renowned planning coordinator in Steve, and we're excited to announce that. We also will have a publicly available survey that we would love to have the public take. It kind of builds on the feedback we heard from the thousands of Utahns that participated during the visioning process, and asking them a little bit more detail so that we can include the public input as an input into the decision-making process. Any questions? Okay, I went through it fast, but just let me know if you have any questions, or again, if you would like to update your headshot and bio as we currently represent them on the website.
Thanks, Muriel. It sounds like very exciting, and looking forward to the press conference. And then I guess the next item is just the wrap up. So thanks everybody for all the great work today, and for Scott and Alan helping to guide us into 3 buckets. And I guess a quick question for Alan: as we divide into these 3 groups to help flesh out these topics, is there a timeline for this? When would you like to see us meet? When do we wrangle us as a herd of cats to help get some feedback to you?
Hey, I'm not taking responsibility for that.
That's the spirit.
No, it's we will, as I said, we'll send out an email that indicates which group you're probably ask whenever you just volunteer to set up first time to meet. We would hope that we're not looking for a big report here. If we can have a page with some bullet points on it that took the broader concept and then provided some definition to it. What are the elements of that broader concept that you think are important? With and if there's a little prioritization there, would be ideal. We don't want to throw everything against the wall. We want it to be thought through. But would like you to be ready to kind of present your concepts or ideas at our next meeting, the fourth week of September.
Okay, great.
So we're talking about kind of working over the next 3 weeks or so. Again, don't expect this to be polished, drafted, ready for publishing. We want you to brainstorm a little bit, and if you just capture it in some bullets, that'll be good.
Okay, great. We're on it. And then I also want to thank the people that contributed to the Google Doc that Mural set up, the folder with the resources. And I did actually complete my homework on the geological resource if anybody's interested. I think the experts suggest that there is a possibility of additional use for that source. It would take a little bit of thought. But anyways, something to think about. And then, does anyone else have anything they'd like to bring up to the group before we adjourn? Ellen, anything we forgot?
Just listen, this has been just fascinating for me. I love the conversation. You're engaged, you're thoughtful, you're informed, and it's been really interesting. So thanks so much for spending some valuable time with us.
Okay, great. And thanks everybody, and I guess we'll see you in about a month.
Sounds good.
Okay, bye.
Thanks.
Bye.